I'm Father Deacon Dean Theophilos. I'm in Minnesota. I've been a mental health therapist for a little over 10 years now. Licensed and alcohol drug counselor, mental health therapist. I'm currently getting my doctorate right now in Jungian psychology and archetypal psychology. I'm on the board. I've spoken here. Thank you guys for coming. So present my brief paper and then do a little Q&A. So thank you again. In this paper, I will briefly explore the historical development of Alcoholics Anonymous and its recovery principles, especially its emphasis on spirituality, and examine their surprising yet profound resonance with orthodoxy and ancient Christian spirituality. For nearly a century, AA has been one of the most influential recovery fellowships in the world, helping millions of individuals pursue sobriety and healing through its distinctive approach to adding spirituality to treatment. At the heart of the fellowship lies the 12 steps, a spiritual framework that emphasizes not only behavioral change, but also the necessity of spiritual awakening. This emphasis of AA sets it apart from many other modern therapeutic models of addiction treatment. While modern debates continue about the role and efficacy of spirituality in the treatment of addiction, a closer look at AA's historical development reveals that its spiritual foundation is neither accidental nor abstract, but rather grounded in its profound vision of transformation, one that resonates with the ancient Christian understanding of the human person. A lesser known but significant influence to AA's formation came from the work of Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Gustav Jung. Jung's insistence that only a vital spiritual experience could bring lasting recovery, also to those afflicted with chronic alcoholism, profoundly shaped AA's co-founder Bill Wilson's thinking. Jung's reflections on the unconscious, the numinous, which I'll explain later, the human psyche's longing for wholeness, provide a conceptual and experiential framework that deeply informed the 12 steps. When this Jungian lineage is considered alongside with Orthodox Christian understanding of the nous, divine grace, theosis, a remarkable convergence emerges. Both perspectives affirm the true healing that requires more than rational mastery or behavioral control. It involves a transformation of the whole person through a relationship with a transcendent reality. In this way, AA's vision of healing unexpectedly echoes the ancient Christian conviction that the restoration of the human person is, at its core, a spiritual journey, not unlike the Church's vision of salvation and transformation through divine union. I have this paper divided into 3 sections. The first provides a historical overview of AA's relationship to Jungian psychology, focusing on Jung's understanding of religious and spiritual experience influence the development of the 12 steps. The second section turns to Jung's distinctive teaching on the numinous and its role in psychological healing, contrasting it with approaches with an atheistic or hyper-materialistic bent that dominates psychology in the early 20th century. The third section examines how AA's embrace of spirituality within the recovery process relates to the ancient Christian anthropology, particularly the Orthodox view of the human person as comprised of body, soul, and spirit. Here I argue that the 12 steps not only affirm the capacity of the human person to experience transcendence, but also serves as a bridge between modern therapeutic practices and the wisdom, the patristic wisdom of the Church. So first part, historical overview. According to Jungian analyst Ian McCabe, a pivotal moment in the development of AA was the case of Roland Hazard, a wealthy American suffering with severe alcoholism, who sought treatment from Jung in Zurich. Recognizing the gravity of Hazard's condition, Jung informed him that no ordinary medical or psychiatric treatment could bring about recovery. Only a spiritual religious experience, Jung concluded, could break the cycle of addiction. Following this counsel, Hazard joined the Oxford Group, which some may know was an interdenominational Christian movement that emphasized moral renewal, confession, spiritual disciple. It was in this context that Hazard experienced the kind of spiritual awakening Jung described, which allowed him to overcome from alcoholism. Hazard's transformation informed and influenced others. A friend, witnessing his sobriety, introduced another struggling alcoholic, Bill Wilson, to the Oxford Group. Wilson was deeply moved by the group's emphasis on spiritual transformation, but resisted some of its explicitly Christian theological comments. Nonetheless, Wilson himself eventually experienced a profound spiritual awakening, described in the Big Book of AA. His experience, which he characterized as God consciousness, was not bound by a particular creed, but was broad and experiential in nature. This expansive conception of spirituality became central to AA's framework, making room for individuals of diverse backgrounds, while still drawing distinction and criticism with its resonance and divergence from Christian doctrine. Regardless of this critiques, AA's writings and traditions consistently emphasize spirituality as an essential ingredient in recovery rather than a secondary supplement. And I would just add, there are many beautiful, beautiful books about the history of AA's conversion from Christianity from many different theologians and priests and thinkers that helped influence the 12 steps and its teachings. And what's so beautiful is, another side note, Bill Wilson was so grateful to Jung that they were a letter correspondence later in Jung's life, where he thanked Jung so much for his ideas and concepts, and Jung, vice versa, praised Bill Wilson for the fact that utilizing this spiritual dynamic within the healing process was making major results throughout the world in the 20th century. If you want those books, I have the books at the table so you can see them. So a little more of an in-depth theological breakdown of Jung's idea. To appreciate AA's connection to Jungian thought, it's important to situate Jung in relation to his predecessor, Sigmund Freud, whose teachings were becoming the predominant viewpoint in psychology at the beginning of the 20th century. Freud viewed the psyche as a structure by the id, a seat of instinctual drives, and the pleasure principle, the ego, the mediator of external reality, the superego, the internalized voice of moral and social prohibitions. The unconscious, which is the point I want to really emphasize in this talk, the unconscious for Freud was a result of the ego repressing instinctual demands, which then resurfaced and disguised through dreams, slips of tongue, neurotic symptoms. In this point, Freud's anthropology was wholly materialistic. He denied any genuine role of the sacred in the psyche, and interpreted religion instead as an infantile fantasy, a projection of paternal figures onto the cosmos. In Freud's view, the spiritual was not real but illusionary, a psychological defense against an indifferent universe. And again, it's that framework that even the 12 steps and Bill Wilson's living in, that milieu of psychology at that time, was that there was just no place for the spiritual, just a byproduct. Jung broke decisively from that materialistic and reductionistic framework by proposing that the unconscious was not only a repository of repressed material, but also a source of archetypes and symbols that we can encounter the sacred. While Jung accepted Freud's concept of the personal unconscious, he extended the theory that included the collective unconscious, a transpersonal dimension structured by universal patterns of meaning. In such works as Psychology and Religion, Jung described the numinous as a dynamic, living reality that confronts the individual and invokes awe. Unlike Freud, Jung did not reduce religious experience to an illusion. He regarded it as an authentic expression of the psyche itself, capable of transforming of consciousness. For Jung, the goal of healing was not simply the ego mastery, but individuation, a lifelong process of integrating unconscious material into the unconscious, aligning the individual with the greater ordering principle of the psyche and cosmos. And I'll just mention it now, as I'll mention it again in this lecture. His acknowledgement isn't fully in line with orthodox spirituality. It's still under the framework of Freudian thought, yet the point I really want to emphasize is that unlike the Freudian model, which really emphasized that healing comes with this overall mastery. You're the center, the ego's the center of it all. You'll control your repressed passions, you'll do it, and then you'll mature into a level where any infantile desires go flittering away. And in Jung's model of individuation, there's a larger picture here. There's larger forces at play. There's larger things that influence our lives in a beautiful, profound way, also in dark ways too. And that level, that anthropological vision, centering the self not as the center force of all our decision making, but in this larger tapestry, again, not distinctly Christian, but even that movement away from that hyper elevation of the ego is deeply powerful. And one of the reasons why Jung even said to Roland when he came into Switzerland was that there are other forces at play that can heal you, not just you muscling it up or centering one's ego and self as the final arbiter of healing. So how does this connect the 12 steps? From this perspective, the first 3 steps of 12 steps can be interpreted as a profound enactment of Jung's psychology of the numinous. Step 1, admitting powerless, reflects the ego's confrontation with the force greater itself. The addict acknowledges that will cannot master the vast energies of the unconscious. Step 2, coming to believe a power greater than itself opens the individual to the collective unconscious, to larger principles that can help one heal. And step 3 presents the ego's engagement with the sacred, turning over one's life to healing. These steps illuminate Jung's insight that encounter the numinous not as projections of wishful fantasies, but authentic dimensions of reality that can reorder the psyche and initiate individuation. Let alone, in the 12 steps, can bring forth the healing and recovery from addiction. The resonance of A, spirituality, and Jung's concepts of the numinous with ancient Christian thought becomes especially unique in the work of the Orthodox theologian Jean-Claude Larcher. In The Spiritual Unconscious, Larcher critiques Freud and Jung's teachings, but affirms that the reality of the conscious was already recognized in the ancient Christian world. For the Church Fathers, the human person is tripartite, body, soul, and spirit, nous. The nous is the highest faculty, the organ of divine contemplation, the means by which the person knows God. Yet Larcher emphasizes the spiritual dimension is not as a detachable part of the self, but a permeating reality that embraces both body and psyche. What he calls the spiritual unconscious manifests in both passions, which enslave, and Godward impulses, which draw one toward the divine union. And this process of transformation through union with God requires the healing of this unconscious dimension, which is possible only through grace. So in light of this, the Freudian reductionistic psychology falls short, while Jung's acknowledgement of the numinous at least moves close to the ancient Christian anthropology, though with significant differences. Jung's numinous remains a therapeutic reality aimed at psychic reconciliation rather than salvation, yet his resistance to modernity's flattening of the human person affirms something critical, that healing requires an openness to the transcendence. And I'll just end talking with my conclusion. And with that also, too, is why also the 12 steps are such a wonderful bridge into thinking in that ancient mindset. What I'll just impart before I end today is that I'm a big advocate right now that the way the ancient world thought and viewed the world, the way the early Christians thought and viewed the world, is not the same as modernity. How the mind is understood, how the literal mind is understood, is not the same as what it was 2,000 years ago. I would recommend that Father Maximus mentioned in the theological lecture, the book by Dixon, How Passions Became Emotions, because it is so shaking of how there just was a whole different way of living that it was in the Levant 2,000 years ago that modernity had. And what's so beautiful with, even now in the 21st century, that AA, this self-help movement, which has healed so many, in connection to what Jung was trying to do, what in some ways failed to, trying to fight against the curve of modernity's insistence of this anthropology that doesn't acknowledge these wider spectrums of reality, I think are so vital. So with the healing that AA does, its convergence with the ancient ascetical teachers, it also, I think, helps us have a mindset, of that ancient mindset that has been so part of our lives still and was part of God's love and dominion toward us. That I'll end. Thank you, guys.
Questions?
Do we need the mic? I don't know. I'll repeat the question if we don't have the mic thing working. If not, I'll mention a few books that I particularly like. If you're interested in the Carl Jung and Alcoholics Anonymous, Ian McCabe wrote this book right here. There's another one called, oh golly gee, I should have brought it. I think it's called The Battling of the Gods, is another Jungian depth book on that. So I can, truly, just talk to me afterwards, I can send you the title. Yes, Father Perry.
Yeah, Father Dean, thank you. In terms of within Jung's understanding of the numinous, I don't know if you know if it's true or not, but when I hear numinous, I think of Rudolf Otto.
Yes. Yes.
Sacred, right?
Yes.
Or the idea of the holy. But I'm wondering, does he conceive of the numinous as personal, or as more of just a kind of theistic ultimate principle or ultimate reality?
And by the way, Father, that's a critique of Jung, because he kind of sidesteps on this. And this is actually, again, and I want to mention this as I was going to speak this last year, but I couldn't make it because I had a child born, which is great. But it's an ongoing work that I'm doing in my own dissertation work, is that Jung, he takes some thoughts from philosophical schools, a little bit of Schopenhauer, a little bit of Spinoza, that doesn't really take the sacred as fully personal and intimate. Yet at the same time, I think he does say things that are acknowledging that the sacred is very personal and very real in that personalness, not just some abstract idea. But that's a valid critique, because he dances around it a few times.
Yeah, because you can still have the decentering.
Yes. Even
if it's not conceived as theistic. But I think obviously as Orthodox we would focus more on the personal, right?
And frankly, that speaks highly to the ongoing debate that I've seen in 12 Steps groups. Like, I go personal. We have a lot of meetings in the Twin Cities. They're agnostic AA meetings that I go. I went just to go. I just want to see all the different types. We have Christian AA meetings in the Twin Cities. We have agnostic. We have Buddhist AA meetings. Just to see how they approach it. And again, it's interesting because the agnostic AA meetings, they actually sometimes quote like Spinoza and other philosophers in that degree. At the same time, they would believe that there's effects from that. I would say that the distinction would be, and it rightly to show, is that there's a personalness to the spirituality of Orthodox spirituality that is not in that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Father.
Father, thank you for sharing all this, and I'm excited to see the rest of your work.
Thank you.
I'm curious if you have thoughts on how some of us as either clinicians or therapists can take some of the mentality of the 12 steps or Jungian psychology as we approach an increasingly secular world in our care.
Here's the thing, piece, and I actually was talking about this at lunch with Don. Forgive me. I actually think an interesting piece where I do think it's interesting, this is my bias, is actually the unconscious. As much as, again, it's funny that we mentioned Freud briefly in our talks today, and I have many critiques. We acknowledge that there are many, many critiques of Freud. But what's interesting is that one of the things I really admire about Freudian, and it's interesting, another point, side tangent, is that actually to be a good Jungian, they say, is actually to be a good Freudian, which a lot of Jungians forget, is that Freud and the acknowledgement of the unconscious, there's layers. There's layers around us. So forget, no talk of spirituality, no talk of spirits, angels, demons, talk about layers. There's layers going on here. And I've actually noticed particularly, because I've worked in secular-based treatment facilities to faith-based ones, that in the secular ones, or even ones who come to faith-based who are struggling, I just acknowledge let's do layers right now. There are layers in reality. There's layers in you. And once we go, okay, to understand the layers of ourselves, it doesn't extinguish who we are, it doesn't extinguish meaning. It actually can open the door to actually more conversations with the spiritual. Because in many regards, we could just say, well, there is spirituality, you're denying it. Well, hold on. My angle would be, is that when you acknowledge layers, within beautiful layers that affirm the Theanthropos, that affirm the icon of who we are, we can get toward new healing. And particularly with addiction, that's an angle I'll bring today. But it's again, it's that tricky balance when you have two worlds at times that are so antithetical. They're so hyper-reductionistic in a materialistic sense into a world that doesn't want to do that. So, thank you. What about time? That's okay. Yeah, it's like if I don't want to take it. 10 more minutes.
I'll just point out too. That,
yeah.
I read once someone say about Freud, who was trying to keep something so tied to a materialistic worldview that you can't do that. It really just doesn't work. And for him, for a flash of a moment, the unconscious was a way of getting beyond, underneath, over top of the material, and then he immediately tried to clinicalize it and blew the whole thing. Somewhat like Descartes, when he began to notice some of the differentiations within the way that he was thinking and the world was thinking, this flash of insight, and then immediately crashes into cogito ergo sum, and he had an insight for a moment and couldn't capitalize on it. And it's the same thing with Freud, and then Jung kind of put his finger on that and highlighted it, this reality that a strictly materialistic worldview can't account for the mind. There's something invisible, intangible, that you have to account for. And of course, I think Freud then went on to kind of fail to really capitalize on that, and I think Jung tried to. And then within an Orthodox worldview, we're all like, well, yeah, I mean, of course, like there's something deeper. And so, one wonders too, like, which idea of the numinous are we talking about? Because that kind of highlighted in Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. Is it that numinous? And all these 1800s folks were still wrestling with the philosophies that birthed modernity, and they weren't quite fully blooming yet. So there's all these concepts just all over the place. And psychology, for me, I think of psychology as applied philosophy. And sometimes philosophy gets done poorly, and then psychology gets done poorly because the philosophy is done poorly. And so if you want to go all the way back to the root, you got to figure out which philosopher, like Spinoza or Kant, Descartes, like which philosopher, Nietzsche, arguably the very first phenomenologist. I mean, where are these things being birthed out of philosophically as modernity is kind of beginning to dawn? Would be an important question, I think. So just wanted to throw that out.
And just to piggyback on it too, which I really, that book by Dixon is really, when Father Mac, I'm like, yes, please get that book. Because the more I keep seeing this moment, there's another great historic book called The Discovery of the Unconscious by Henri Eldenberger, Canadian analyst. He has a deep dive into it. Yeah, it's huge. I love it. I'd carry it if I could, but it's big, but too heavy. But it's so great because he's commenting how much of the nature of that postmodern movement that's occurring in the 1800s, and at the same time, like there's something distinct of that was lost in the minds of the ancient world. That I sometimes, when I get really cheeky, I'll tell you this story. People ask like, because people come, it was first, come like, oh, I don't, God, blah, 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 does he believe or not? Like, well, I actually think that question wouldn't even be asked if we were Second Temple Jewish people or Hebrews in Levant. That just wouldn't be a question. Like ancient Babylon wasn't asking that question. Now again, is the question a great question to ask? Yes, it is a great question to ask. But it always ponders me like, yeah, we were early Christians and we were in Greece in 200 AD. Just wouldn't be an idea. But that's what's so cool about, I think, sometimes the healing of this, and actually 12 steps, because the 12 steps, everyone's coming together for healing. I think we're embracing actually a more ancient mindset. Time. I'm big about time because I'm like, I don't want to say, but thank you guys. Yes, thank you so much.